Good morning, Journey. I'm so glad you guys could be with us online this morning. Today, as we dive into part 6 of our series, Bystander, I want to start by asking a question. And believe it or not, I think it's one of the most popular questions. I think it's one of the most struggled with questions, and maybe one of the most asked questions, especially today with what's happening in our world, with all of the fear and all of the panic and all of the bad that seems to be going on. The question is this: why would a good God allow bad things to happen? Why would a good God allow bad things to happen? And what's really interesting is as we kind of dive into this question that so many of us have wrestled with, including myself, we always tend to focus on the bad outside, never the bad in here. Let me ask you another question. And you're sitting at home, so you don't have to raise your hands with this, but if you really want to participate, feel free, raise your hands. Let me ask you this question. Have you ever done anything bad? I mean, and when I say bad, I don't mean like slap on the wrist bad. I mean like have you ever wanted to do something so bad that if you were caught, you would be arrested and put in jail? I mean, so bad that the only thing that's keeping you from actually doing this bad thing is the fact that you would be caught and put in jail. Right? I mean, we've all kind of been there. We've all thought about doing those kinds of things. We've all kind of wanted to do something like that, but there were things that kept us from doing it. There's this kind of bad in us. But when we tackle this idea of a good God in a world that's full of pain and that's full of bad, we always tend to focus on the bad that's outside of us, never the bad that's in us. As a matter of fact, I've never heard anybody wrestle with the question this way: how could a good God allow me to happen? Because I'm bad, right? I mean, how could a good God allow me to happen? See, what happens here is we end up coming to a problem with this question, that if we kind of carry it out to its end, it's kind of it brings us to an extreme where you can't really even answer the question. And I know we don't want to go this, because this is a really kind of complicated question. It's a very kind of emotional question. But if you were to carry this question out to the end, it would lead us to this result, and that is, if God was good, He would have done something about me by now. If God were really good, he would have had to have done something about me by now. He would have to have dealt with me. But since God didn't deal with me, then clearly there isn't a God. Which would then take us to the next obvious conclusion, and that's this: I don't believe God exists because I exist. And as long as I'm existing, God can't be real. The only way, as a matter of fact, that I could believe that God would exist is if I cease to exist. But if I cease to exist, you would never be able to prove to me that God did exist. Do you see where it's coming to? It's coming to a conclusion that we could never actually verify, that we could never actually substantiate. But I think in the midst of this question, in the midst of this struggle, the gospel writer John, the guy that we've been kind of spending time with the last 6 weeks, walking through this journey with Jesus, I think the gospel writer John would say, hold on, guys, just hang on for a moment. I think I've discovered something through my time with Jesus that would help you with this dilemma that you're in, that would help you kind of confront this question that you would have. See, we're in part 6 of a series, and this whole series is around this idea of John, the gospel writer, and his journey with Jesus, his experience with Jesus. And John is writing all of these things. He actually says these things. He builds them around these events that actually are signs that point to who Jesus was, John would say. And he said, I've written all these things so that you would believe what I believe, so that you would know not just what Jesus did, but so that you would know who Jesus was and perhaps believe the way I believed. And so many of us are in a place in our lives right now where we need to believe that way, don't we? You see, so many people struggle with that whole question of, but if God is good, if there is a good God, why would all this be allowed in this world? You see, you're not the only ones who ask that, and that's the story we're going to dive into today. Our story is going to pick up in chapter 11. John tells us Jesus had just kind of done some work in Jerusalem, and now he's outside Jerusalem, not very far outside of Jerusalem, but just a little bit outside of Jerusalem. And now a man named Lazarus was sick. This was kind of Jesus' friend. He was from Bethany, the village of Martha and her sister, or Mary rather, and her sister Martha. These were friends of Jesus. These were people that Jesus was close to and Jesus knew. So the sisters sent word to Jesus, Lord, the one you love is sick. And I just think that that's such an amazing statement. Imagine being so close to Jesus that someone could come to him and say, Jesus, the one you love is sick. And Jesus would know exactly who they're talking about. When he heard this, Jesus said, "This sickness will not end in death." He says, this sickness, this whole thing, it is for God's glory. And he kind of opens up this whole new category that nobody was expecting and that no one up to this point had any understanding. Well, I think we're all even trying to connect the dots now. Wait a second. Sickness for God's glory? Like, this sickness is for God's glory? Jesus, that doesn't make any sense. I thought, like, how can there be a good God if bad things are happening to good people, if there's all this pain in the world? And Jesus was saying, I understand all that. And don't get me wrong. I'm not the author of pain. I'm not the author of sickness. I didn't do this, but I'm going to use this. Oh, this will be used, he said, for God's glory. No, it is for God's glory, he says, so that, and now he's getting to the point of this. He's getting to kind of the purpose of this, so that God's Son, me, so that Jesus may be glorified through it. It's like Jesus is kind of saying, I'm going to manufacture this event. Guys, I've done so many things along the way, but you didn't believe, and you still kind of question. You're still not sure who I am. So I'm going to go all out. I'm going to do something that is just indisputable evidence. That if you've ever wondered, if you've ever questioned who I was, or what I was capable of, or if what I was saying about me was actually true, I'm going to give you evidence for it. And it comes across in this incredible story that it really in this moment just seems actually kind of harsh. And we know it seems kind of harsh because of what John follows up with next. John tells us, now Jesus loved Martha and her sister Mary and Lazarus. Now, why would John tell us that? Because up until this point, we're not really sure he does, right? I mean, he seems kind of harsh in the way he's dealing with this. And John's reminding us, guys, as you're reading the story, as you're reading this thing that I'm writing to you, I don't want you to like close it up early and say, this is crazy. I'm not listening to this guy. He said, I want you to understand that even though it seems like Jesus didn't love these people in this moment, you need to know he actually loved them. He loved them so much. So when he heard that Lazarus was sick, he stayed where he was 2 more days to manufacture an event. He wanted to manufacture an event for his disciples, but I also think he wanted to manufacture an event for you and for me, for all of those who would come after him, to know that he is who he said he was, to prove once and for all that he was capable of doing what he always said he would do. Finally, after 2 days, he kind of stood up and said, all right, guys, are you ready to go? Let's go back to Judea. And his disciples at this point, they're kind of worked up, like, back to Judea, Jesus. We just kind of left there. They actually say this to him. They say, but Rabbi, a short while ago, the Jews had tried to stone you. Like, Jesus, I know you're brilliant and you're amazing, but maybe you're running short on memory these days. I don't know if you remember, the last time we were there, they tried to stone you. And yet you're going back? And then Jesus does what Jesus always does. He kind of spins the conversation and he takes it in a direction that no one understands immediately, but then he later explains it. He says this, he says, Jesus answered, are there not 12 hours of daylight? To which I'm sure the disciples kind of lean in like, yeah? So what? Jesus says, anyone who walks in the daytime will not stumble, for they see by the world's light. Yeah, that's true, Jesus. It's when a person walks at night, Jesus continues, that they stumble, for they have no light. Yeah, Jesus, we know all that. What do you mean? And what's becoming clearer and clearer as this narrative continues to unfold is what Jesus is really getting to in this point is that, guys, the light of the world is here. And the light of the world, while he's here, is going to do things that are significant to make a point. Follow the light of the world while the light of the world is here. Because when the light of the world isn't in the world anymore, the world's going to appear dark. What Jesus is referring to with these 12 hours, he's actually referring to 12 hours of opportunity. These are 12 hours of opportunity, 12 hours where we can do something significant, where we can do something that would change the world. In these 12 hours, we can do something that would bring so much purpose into this world, so much light into this world, that, guys, if you're not like paying attention, you might miss it. You might miss the very opportunity of a lifetime to bring light into this world when it needs light the most. Now, for you and I sitting at home, this couldn't be any more appropriate to where we are today. Christians, the world needs the light. And we have an unprecedented opportunity to be the light of the world in this world, to bring the love and the light of Jesus into this world. Jesus said, follow the light while the light is here. He kind of reiterated what he did last week as we talked about him healing the blind man. Follow the light of the world while the light of the world is here. Because eventually the light of the world is going to go and the world will appear more dark than it ever has. And you'll find yourself stumbling around in darkness. You'll find yourself stumbling around in a void. You'll find yourself just feeling pitiful and down and in dread. As Richard Dawkins said, and I think he said it so eloquently. He says, without the author of life, Jesus would say, without the author of life, without the light of the world, there is at bottom no design. Get this, no design, no purpose, no evil and no good. Nothing but blind, pitiless indifference. And Jesus said, that's what it's going to feel like without me. So while I'm here, follow me. Follow the light of the world. Follow the author of life. And here's even more that. When I go, I want you to be the light of the world. I want you to be the light in the world. For those who are feeling down, like there is all evil and there's no good. And there's nothing but pitiless indifference. After he said this, after he basically said, hey guys, you ready to go with me? He went on to tell them, hey, guys, our friend Lazarus, he's fallen asleep, but I'm going to go wake him up. To which I'm sure the disciples thought, but Jesus, you don't wake sick people up. They need their sleep, right? The sleep helps them recover. The fever will break. They'll start to recover. Jesus, just don't wake him up. You're leave him there. What they're really saying is, Jesus, we don't want to go. If he's really asleep, just let him sleep. We're fine. We don't need to go back to Judea. That's where it's dangerous. We don't want to make another journey. We've been traveling forever. Like, if Lazarus is just asleep, he'll be fine. Jesus knew that his disciples weren't understanding him. Lord, if he sleeps, he'll get better, the disciple says. Jesus had been speaking of Lazarus' death, but his disciples thought that he meant a natural sleep. So then Jesus had to tell them plainly, hey guys, Lazarus is dead. Lazarus is dead. And I think that they're just in this moment of shock and horror and panic. But Jesus, you said this wasn't going to end in death. Jesus, you said this wasn't going to end in death and that there was a purpose in this. Why didn't we leave 2 days ago when we found out? Why did we wait? Why did we allow Mary and Martha and Lazarus to suffer like this? Jesus, I don't understand what you're doing. And then Jesus begins to clue them in. He says, Lazarus is dead. And then I can't even explain how harsh these words sound, but this is why we know these narratives are true, because no one would make this up. No one would put these words into the mouth of Jesus, especially somebody like John, who wants you to believe in Jesus. He said, here's why I'm writing this, so that you would believe. If these things didn't actually happen, there is no way John would have included this. Jesus said, yeah, Lazarus is dead. And for your sake, get this, I am glad. For your sake, I'm glad I wasn't there. For your sake, I'm glad I wasn't there to help my friend avoid the pain that he was in, to help my friends avoid the suffering of watching their brother die. For your sake, and for the sake of future generations, for my sake, and for your sake, as you're watching at home today, he would say, I'm glad I wasn't there because I'm ready to do something. I want to do something in this moment where the world, where the situation just feels overwhelmed with darkness, where we continue to question, how can there be good in the presence of all this bad? How could there be a good God in the presence of all of this? Jesus said, I'm doing this to prove a point. I'm doing this so that like you would know beyond a shadow of a doubt who I am. We would say, but bad things aren't supposed to happen to good people. And Jesus said, bad things even happen to my people. They even happen to my friends. He said, I'm glad I wasn't there. So that, and here's the purpose, you may believe. So that you may believe. And that's the point of all this, isn't it? So that we would believe. We would believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God. And he says, but let us go to him. They begin to get up, and if there's any humor in this story at all, it's found in this next verse. Thomas, right? Doubting Thomas, the guy who always doubts and doesn't really believe. Thomas stands up and says to the rest of the disciples, let us also go that we may die with him. Or in other words, Lazarus is dead. If we go this way, they're going to kill Jesus and they're going to kill us, guilty by association. Let's just all go and let's die. Let's all go die together. Little do they know that this is all manufactured to do something significant, to prove to them once and for all that Jesus is who he said he was. Jesus makes his way to the town. On his arrival, Jesus found that Lazarus had already been dead, and already been in the tomb for 4 days. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went out to meet him, and she said, "Lord, Lord." And then she has this conversation with Jesus that I think so many of us want to have at times in our life, but we're scared to. We feel like if we do it, it's unforgivable, and you should never talk to God that way. But here's what you need to know. You're allowed to talk to God that way. God wants to know what's going on in your heart. He wants to know what you're feeling. Jesus' own friends had this very same kind of conversation with Jesus. She went out and she said, "Lord, where were you? Lord, if you had been here, my brother wouldn't have died. Like, Jesus, I love you. But I sent a messenger to go get you so you could come back and you could touch my brother, your friend, so that you could heal him. Where were you, Jesus? Why weren't you here? Why didn't you show up? I needed you and you weren't here. Where were you?" And in the pain and the darkness of this situation, of Martha's life, she looked at God and she said, "Where are you?" And in the pain and in the darkness of your situations, in your life, sometimes you look up and you wonder the very same thing. God, where are you? I'm sure there are some people in the world right now who are suffering, who are part of this pandemic and overwhelmed with fear and anxiousness, and look out into the world and say, "God, where are you? In the midst of the pain, in the midst of the fear, in the midst of all of this darkness, where are you?" And in the midst of all this pain, Martha, she found a way to kind of muster up her faith. And she said, "Jesus, I wish you would have been here. I don't know why you were late, but I know that even now, God will give you whatever you ask." And I think Jesus looked at her and smiled and said, "Martha, your brother will rise again." And then Martha, at this point, I think she's thinking Jesus came to give her a lesson. He came to preach and correct her theology. And she's like, "Jesus, I know all this. I heard this from my grandma, from my mom, from our ancestors. You were teaching this to me. The temple leaders taught it to me. I know. She follows up and she says this, "Jesus, I know he will rise again in the resurrection at the last day. But Jesus, I'm not concerned about the last day. I'm concerned about now. He could be alive now, but you didn't show up." And what she didn't understand in this moment was that Jesus didn't show up to correct her theology. Jesus didn't show up to give her a sermon, to give her another lesson. "Well, Martha, you're not believing." No, Jesus showed up and he said, "Martha, you're seeing too narrowly. It is so much bigger and so much better than you can even imagine. I'm not here to correct your theology. I'm not here to give you another lesson, another sermon." He wraps up with this incredible statement that we in no way should kind of just gloss over. He says, "Martha, I'm not here to teach you about the resurrection. I'm not here to teach you about the life." He said, "Here's what I want you to know, Martha. I am the resurrection. I am the life. I am the resurrection and the life personified. It's me. I'm not teaching you another lesson. You are looking into the eyes of the resurrection and the life. I'm blowing all of your old categories out the window, Martha. If you would just look into me and the thoughts you think about me, these are the most important thoughts you'll ever have in your entire life in all the world. Martha, you're looking into the eyes of the resurrection and the life. I am the resurrection and the life." And then he follows up with this incredible statement. "The one who believes in me will live, even though they die." Which I think Martha's probably thinking at this point, "Jesus, I don't understand. This isn't making any sense." And then he makes it even harder. "And whoever lives by believing in me will never die." And there's no possible way that Martha could take all this in this moment with her brother dead and the mourning and the weeping and all that's happening. But Jesus is being very clear in this moment. He's saying, "Martha, you need to understand, death is just a doorway. Death is just a transition into something else. Death isn't the end. And if you believe in me, death won't be your end either. Martha, your brother, he'll live again. But you need to understand this. No matter who dies, and we're all going to die, right? People are all going to die. Our bodies are going to give out at some point. he would say, for those who believe in me, for those who trust in me. And that's what that Greek phrase means, believe in. It means to trust in, to not just to see the works and say, yeah, I believe that. No, it's to see the works and say, no, I believe in him. I trust in him. I'm taking my trust in all of this world. I'm saying, Jesus, I would rather trust you than me. I'm trusting you. For those that do that say, Jesus, I trust in you. Jesus would say, death isn't the end. Death is a doorway. Death is a transition. And then he looks down at Martha and he asked her the question. And I think it's a question that we have to answer. He said, Martha, do you believe this? Or really what he's saying is, Martha, who do you think I am? Do you believe that I'm the resurrection and the life? Have you put your trust in me? And if you have, your brother will live. You will live. Death will not be the end. And guys, I think that's the question he's asking you. Do you believe this? Who is Jesus to you? Martha, in this moment, completely overwhelmed, finds her last ounce of faith, and she says, yes, Lord. Yes, Lord. Yes, Lord, I believe you are the Messiah, the Son of God, who is to come into the world. Jesus, I believe. When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews that had come along with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in spirit and he was troubled. Martha runs. She goes and she gets her sister Mary. Mary has a similar conversation with Jesus. Jesus sees their emotion. Jesus sees their weeping. And now he's troubled. And he says to them, where have you laid him? And they say, come and see, Lord. And then John kind of breaks from this moment. And he gives us this incredible verse. It's only 2 words long, but it's this incredible glimpse into who Jesus was. Jesus seeing all of this pain and all of this suffering. Jesus knowing divinely where this is going and what's about to happen. He takes a moment. He steps out of this, the solution, if you will, out of the resolution, and he connects with humanity. He connects with empathy, with what they're feeling. And I think it's why John would say later all the things he says about Jesus, why Peter would say in his own writings, he said, guys, you can cast all of your cares on the Lord because he cares for you. And we might ask, Peter, how do you know he cares for us? And Peter would say, because I was there. I was there that day outside the tomb with Lazarus, and I saw what Jesus did. We knew what was beginning to happen. We began to feel this stirring. We had this feeling with the words that he was giving that something was about to happen. But before he answered the question, before he solved the problem, Jesus took a step out of the situation, and he connected, and he felt what they felt, and he cared for what they were feeling for. It's like John would say, all of this is kind of happening in slow motion, and Jesus is walking towards the tomb. But before he does anything, he pauses for a moment and he connects with the humanity that's around him. And John tells us that Jesus would weep. Jesus wept. Jesus connected and he felt what you felt, and he's feeling what you're feeling right now. And he's moved and he's troubled. Then the Jews said, see how he loved him. But some of them said, could not he who opened the eyes of a blind man have kept this man from dying? And there we are again. Right back at the same problem, right? If he could have, he would have. But since he didn't, obviously he can't. See, but little did they know, he could have. He just didn't. And he didn't for your sake and for mine. And in this moment, Jesus does something amazing. All of eternity. He condenses all of eternity to the span of a single afternoon. He condenses all of eternity, all of the pain, all of the suffering, all of what we would experience in our lifetime, all of the questions, all of the tears, all of the anxiety, all of the fear. He takes all of that, all of what we would just experience in a lifetime, and he just boils it down to one afternoon. He condenses it to this one afternoon experience so that his disciples would know, so that all the future generations would know, so that you would know, and so that I would know who Jesus was. Jesus, once more, deeply moved, he came to the tomb. And he said, "Take away the stone." And everyone, I imagine, at this moment kind of gasped. "But Lord," Martha said, "Lord, I'm not sure if you remember, but you were late? Like you were really late?" Jesus, he's been in the tomb for 4 days. I mean, clearly at this point, he stinks, right? He smells. It's been 4 days. And then Jesus looks at her and he said, "Did I not tell you that if you believe, you will see the glory of God?" And let me take a step out of the story just for one moment to say, for all of us, didn't Jesus tell us the same thing, that if we believe, we would see the glory of God? And what's our reaction? Oftentimes our reaction is this, isn't it? It's, but I want to see it now. But I want to see it right now. And right now. And Jesus saying, but I told you, it's coming. You would see the glory of God. "Martha, didn't I tell you you would see the glory of God?" And Martha's, I'm sure, thinking, "Yeah, Jesus, but you were late. I was worried about it now, and you're not here." Nevertheless, Martha was convinced. So they took away the stone. And then Jesus looked up and he said, and I absolutely love this prayer. It's one of my favorite prayers Jesus ever prays. He says this, "Father, I thank you that you have always heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I said this for the benefit of the people standing here, that they may believe that you sent me." Or in other words, here's what Jesus is saying. Hey, Dad, I know that you hear me. I know that you always hear me. I'm just kind of saying this for the sake of those around me. I know that when I do things, I'm doing things that you've asked me to do. Like you and I are one. We kind of move and we act as one. And I want them to know that we move and we act as one. So I'm just praying this prayer for their sake, for their benefit, so that they would see how unified we are, that they would see that I am your son and I'm only here doing the things that you want me to do. Got it? Okay, we're good. When he said this, Jesus called out in a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out!" And then John, I imagine, later in his life, as he's kind of dictating the story to whoever he's dictating it to, I just imagine at this point of the story, he's just overwhelmed with emotion. He's like, "Guys, you wouldn't believe what happened. The dead man came out. He came out. He walked out of the tomb. His hands and his feet were wrapped with strips of linen, and a cloth was around his face. And guys, we were too scared to even move. We were just kind of overwhelmed with emotion. We were in shock. We were in awe. We were standing there with chins dropped, like just overwhelmed by what was happening. So much so that Jesus had to kind of wake us up from it. Jesus would then say, "Hey, guys, wake up. Take off the grave clothes. Let him go." So we did. We ran over and we took the linen clothes off him, and you wouldn't believe it. It was Lazarus. And not only was he alive, but he was healed of his disease. That, like, whatever that thing was that he was struggling with, whatever sickness had come on him, whatever evil had come on him, an evil that we would all struggle with, a sickness that we would all struggle with, it was gone. And then John makes a statement that I don't think he necessarily had to make, but he included it so that you would know and that I would know. But I think at this point, we can all kind of imagine what's about to happen. John said, "Therefore, many of the Jews who had come to visit Mary had seen what Jesus did, and they believed in him." And if that isn't like the biggest, of course, statement, I don't know what is. Of course they believed. Who's ever seen a dead man? They saw him dead for 4 days in a tomb, and then he gets up and he walks out alive, completely healed of his disease and his ailments. Of course they believed. They didn't believe because of belief. They didn't believe because of faith. They didn't even believe because of what somebody else had said. They believed because of what they saw, and it changed the world forever. It brings us back to John's original formula. John would say this: seeing is believing. And believing leads to trusting. And that's what happened. The people here saw Jesus do something absolutely magnificent. They saw the sign, and they saw to where the sign pointed. And they believed. And that belief turned into trust. And they trusted who Jesus was. But even though they trusted who Jesus was, There were those who didn't. These were the willfully blind people. These were the people that refused to see the signs. Right? We've been talking about this for the past few weeks. The willfully blind, that even though the evidence is there, refuse to see the evidence because it doesn't line up with their confirmation bias. So it's just excused as nonsense. These religious people, these temporal leaders, they say this can't happen. This absolutely cannot happen. We've got to find a way to arrest Jesus. And not only do they make a plan to get Jesus, they make a plan to arrest Lazarus as well. They have this little meeting, which I'm sure was leaked to John later on. John lets us know. They say this: if we let him go, which to me is such an arrogant statement, like they have any control over Jesus. I mean, it's so arrogant. Later, when Jesus is about to be crucified, he lets everyone know, you're not taking my life from me. I'm laying it down for you. You couldn't kill me if you tried, but I'm laying it down for you. You have no control. You have no authority over my life. And this arrogance, if we let him go on like this, like we have any choice in the matter, if we let him go on like this, everyone will believe in him. Little do they know that about 2,000 years later, 1/3 of the world's population would believe in him. And then Rome will come and take away both our temple and our nation. Guys, we have so much to lose. But what they didn't see is that they had so much to gain. But they were blinded. They were willfully blind to the evidence that was before them. They missed the whole point of what John was trying to say, that guys, I know you're wrestling with this idea of pain and suffering and darkness and bad and evil in a world. And if that's in the world, then how can there be a good God? But he said, here's the thing. I saw God come to the world. I saw God come in the form of a human, of a body of Jesus. And this Jesus, he existed. He coexisted in this world that was full of evil. For God so loved this evil world full of evil people that he sent his only son, Jesus, to take away their sin, their evil, and that whoever would believe in him would experience life in Jesus' name. Guys, they were missing it. The evidence was right before them, and they were missing it. Don't miss it. Don't allow yourself to be so willfully blind that you don't see the evidence and what the evidence is pointing to. The light of the world has come. And John said, but they missed it. He actually tells us earlier in his gospel, he says, the light of the world has come into the world. But people loved darkness instead of light because their deeds were evil and they missed the light of the world. And I think John's saying, guys, I don't want you to miss it. I know there's this question of goodness and how can there be a good God in the world in a world full of so much pain and suffering. And he said, here's the thing. Pain and suffering in the world doesn't excuse the absence of God. It actually underscores the presence of God. That it's there and God didn't bring it there, but God has an answer for it. And he sent that answer. And that answer is the light of the world. He said, I saw God coexist in a world full of evil men. And here's the thing. He loved me. And he didn't eliminate my evil. He loved me. And I trusted in him. And then he went at work eliminating my evil. And he would say, that's the same thing I want for you. I want you to see the light of the world, and I want you to respond. And I want you to follow, and I want you to trust. I want you to follow even though you may not believe all that he's going to say. You may not even believe all of it yet. But you're going to follow. And then eventually you'll believe. And then eventually you'll trust in him. And your life will never be the same. John said, that's why I've written these things. These things, he gets to his agenda at the end of his gospel. These things are written that you may believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God. And that by believing in him, you may have life. And you may have life in his name. Hey guys, he would say, I'm just a bystander. I don't know why God chose me to be a part of these things, but I know all I can tell you is that the light of the world showed up, and it was brighter than I could have ever imagined. And it did things that I could never have believed. But I saw it. And I want you to see with your mind's eye what I saw. That's why I'm writing this. I want you to hear with your mind's ear what I heard, so that you would believe and that you would follow the light of the world and that you would receive life. Don't let it pass you by. We've been given an opportunity. In this moment, in our world, we've been given an opportunity to follow the light, to be the light in this world, to show those around us the goodness and the kindness and the grace and the love of Jesus. That even in the midst of all the darkness and all the pain and all the suffering journey, we've been given an opportunity to love those around us in a way like they've never been loved before. And just perhaps through that, they would experience the goodness of Jesus. And they might see the light of the world. And they might begin to follow. And then eventually they might believe. And finally they would trust. And for those of you who are on the fence, who would say, I'm not even sure I believe, for years I've doubted, this is the very question that kind of pushed me away from faith to begin with. I just want to say this to you. Don't give up. Don't give up. Don't give up. Keep following the light of the world. And come back next week for part 7, for the conclusion of Bystander, where Jesus does the greatest thing imaginable, the biggest sign imaginable to substantiate all the claims he made about himself. Come back next week for Easter Sunday as we celebrate. I love you. There's nothing you can do about it. Let me close in prayer and we'll wrap up. Heavenly Father, I thank you for another opportunity to look at your word and to look at this incredible story, God, this incredible narrative. And God, there's so much in here that proves to that no one would ever say about you, that no one would ever make up. Lord, but we look at it and we know that you are who you said you are. I pray for those of us, God, who have that confidence to know and to believe. God, that you would give us the opportunity and the courage to take that opportunity, Lord, to be the light in this world, to show the light to people, God, who may have never experienced it. God, I pray for those who are on the fence of believing, that God, maybe even on the fence of not believing because of this whole trouble, this whole tension. God, I pray that this would be the thing that encourages us to keep going, to not give up, to see, God, that even though there's pain and suffering, it doesn't mean there is no God. God, it even means even more that there is a God and that God has a plan and a purpose. God, and I pray that we would see that. I pray that you'd give us the wisdom to see it and the courage to keep walking and to keep following you. In Jesus' name I pray.